Toscana, Switzerland, January 1975. The village sat quiet under a grey winter sky, the kind of quiet that only small places in small countries achieve, where the loudest sound on a Tuesday morning is a church bell or the scrape of someone's boot on a stone path. Audrey Hepburn was in her kitchen, making breakfast for her sons. Sean was 14, Luca was 4. She had been doing this for years now. The breakfast, the school run, the shopping at the market in the village, the garden in summer, the fireplace in winter. She had built a life that looked, from the outside, like exactly what she had always said she wanted. It was not what she had always said she wanted, or rather, it was only part of it. The other part, the part she had not spoken about in years, was the part that woke her at 3 in the morning and would not let her go back to sleep. Not the films, not the cameras, not the awards, something smaller and harder to name. The feeling of walking onto a set and knowing, before the director said a word, exactly what the scene needed. The feeling of being exactly equal to a task that required everything you had. The feeling of being, in the fullest sense, alive. She had given that up. She had given it up deliberately and for reasons she still believed in. Her son needed her, her boys needed her. That was real, that mattered more than anything a studio could offer. But sitting at the kitchen table in Toscana's, in January 1975, with the grey sky outside the window and the sound of Sean's footsteps overhead, Audrey Hepburn was 45 years old and quietly asking herself a question she had been avoiding for years. What was left of her if she gave away everything that had made her? This is the story of how Audrey Hepburn disappeared from Hollywood at the height of her fame, why she stayed gone for nearly a decade, and what happened the morning she walked back onto a film set for the first time. It is also the story of everything that happened in between, the years the world did not see, the private grief and the private endurance and the private cost of choosing family over everything else, when family kept refusing to hold. In 1967, Audrey Hepburn was at the absolute peak of her career. The resume was extraordinary. Roman Holiday, Sabrina, Funny Face, The Nun Story, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Charade, My Fair Lady, How to Steal a Million, each of them iconic, each of them the kind of film that gets shown in film schools and in retrospectives and in late-night television slots. The kind of film that does not age because what makes it work is not a trend or a fashion, but a person, and the person is Audrey Hepburn, and there is only ever one of those. She had 5 Academy Award nominations, 1 win, multiple BAFTA awards, a Tony, a Golden Globe. She was by any reasonable measure one of the greatest stars the film industry had ever produced, and she walked away. The last film before her departure was Wait Until Dark, a Terence Young thriller in which Audrey played Susie, a newly blind woman terrorized in her own apartment by a trio of criminals. She had earned her 5th Oscar nomination for the performance. The film was released in November 1967, and then Audrey Hepburn essentially disappeared from movie screens for 9 years. The reasons were multiple, and they were real, and they need to be understood in order to understand what came after. The most immediate reason was Sean. Her son had been born in 1960, after 2 devastating miscarriages that had nearly broken her. She had wanted children with a desperation that her friends described as the defining hunger of her private life, the thing that sat underneath the talent and the grace and the ambition like bedrock. She had spent the 1950s building one of the greatest careers in Hollywood history, while her body failed her repeatedly in the thing she wanted most, the first miscarriage. The second, at 6 months, the one that the press learned about, the one that she did not speak of publicly because there were no words for it that were adequate. And then Sean, born healthy, born real, born into a mother who had been waiting for him her entire adult life. From the moment Sean existed, Audrey's relationship with her career shifted. She became, in her own telling, more selective. She took projects that allowed her to be near home. She turned down things that would have kept her away for months. She built her life around her son in a way that her colleagues understood, and that some of them privately found heartbreaking because they could see what she was trading away and she could not see it yet, or would not. By the time Wait Until Dark wrapped, Audrey had already made her decision. She was finished, not with film exactly, and not forever, but with the life she had been living, the constant travel, the long absences, the sense that she was always arriving somewhere and never quite home. She wanted to be home. She wanted to watch Sean grow up. She wanted to cook breakfast and walk to school and be the mother she had planned to be since before she knew what she was capable of professionally. She and Mel Ferreira divorced in 1968. She spoke to him only twice more for the rest of her life. In June 1968, on a Mediterranean cruise, Audrey met Andrea Dotti. He was Italian, charming, 9 years younger than her, a psychiatrist from a wealthy aristocratic Roman family. He had a quality that she had been looking for her whole life and had never quite found, or had found and lost, the quality of seeming solid, of seeming like someone who would stay. She had been abandoned at 6 by a father who walked out and never walked back. She had built the most successful career in Hollywood history, in part on the private terror of being left again. Andrea Dotti did not seem like a man who would leave. She told friends she had fallen in love with him while they explored ancient Greek ruins together. She told the press she intended to become an Italian housewife, and meant every word of it. They married in January 1969. She was 39 years old. She was going to have a second child, and a full life, and a real home, and everything she had built her career to protect herself from not having. Luca was born on February 8, 1970. Audrey rose at dawn every morning to see her husband off to work and both boys off to school. She learned the markets, the rhythms of a Roman household, the language of a city that was not her own but that she tried, sincerely and without reservation, to make hers. She cooked, she gardened, she kept animals, she did all the things that a woman who has made her peace with a particular life is supposed to do, and every morning the newspapers arrived, and almost every morning there were photographs. The paparazzi in Rome in the 1970s were numerous and shameless and very good at their jobs, and their favorite subject for years was Dr. Andrea Dotti, husband of Audrey Hepburn, out in the clubs and discos of Rome with women who were not his wife. Beautiful women, young women, sometimes famous women. The photographers documented over 200 such occasions across the course of the marriage. Audrey could not avoid the papers. She could not avoid the photographs. She tried to protect her sons from them, tried to shield Luca especially, who was too young to understand what he was seeing, but who understood from an early age that the flashbulbs that appeared every time they went out were connected to something that made his mother's face go very still. She stayed. She stayed the way she did everything, completely and without reservation, because leaving felt like failure, and failure was the thing she could not bear. She told Us magazine in 1988, "I hung on in both marriages very hard, as long as I could for the children's sake, and out of respect for marriage." She suffered another miscarriage in 1974, a fourth in a life that had been marked by them, each one a small private catastrophe that she did not discuss publicly, and that left its mark on her body and her spirit in ways that no amount of grace could fully conceal. In 1978, Sean, now 18, now old enough to understand, came home to find his mother in bed, having taken what he later described quietly and without drama as a bunch of sleeping pills. She looked at him with bloodshot eyes and told him things that no child should hear about the state of her marriage, about what Andrea Dotti had been doing, about how long she had known. Sean sat with her. He stayed. He said later that in that moment he understood his mother's real choice. She could stay in bed and cry herself to sleep every day, or she could get on with it. She got on with it. But before that particular crisis, before 1978, there had been 1975, and 1975 was when a script arrived that would change everything. The script was for Robin and Marian, a film about what happens to legendary people after the legend ends. Robin Hood, 20 years on, no longer young, no longer invincible, returning to England after 20 years on the Crusades to find that Sherwood Forest is smaller than he remembered, that Little John's knees hurt on cold mornings, and that Maid Marian is not waiting for him in a forest clearing. She is in a convent. She has become the mother superior of a small religious house, and she has found, in the silence and the order of that life, something that looks very much like peace. It was a role about a woman who had withdrawn from the world, a woman who had buried something she loved in order to survive it, a woman who, when the person she had once loved most came back to her door, had to decide whether to open it or keep it closed. Audrey read the script and understood immediately that she was not really reading about Maid Marian. She was also nervous. She had been away from film for 9 years. The industry had changed. The audiences had changed. She had changed in ways she could feel but not fully articulate. She was 45 years old, and she was acutely, painfully aware that 45 was not 25, and that the camera did not forget arithmetic even when everyone in the room agreed not to mention it. She told a friend she was frightened. Not the useful, productive fear that she had always known before performances, the fear that meant you cared, that you were awake and alive to what was at stake, something closer to dread, the fear of finding out that the thing she had been was gone, and that what remained was not enough. She agreed to do the film. She did it because the script was extraordinary, because the role was right, because her sons could travel with her to the location shoot in Spain during their summer holidays, and because Richard Lester, the director, was known for working quickly. In and out, in 6 weeks. She could manage 6 weeks. She told herself she could manage 6 weeks. The production shot on location in the forests and fields of northern Spain, which doubled for Nottinghamshire. The supporting cast was exceptional. Robert Shaw as the Sheriff of Nottingham, Richard Harris as King Richard, Nicol Williamson as Little John, Ian Holm, actors of serious caliber, men who worked with intensity and craft, and across from Audrey, playing Robin Hood, Sean Connery. Broad, confident, funny, magnetic, a man who treated a film set with the same relaxed authority he brought to everything. He didn't like to rehearse, which unsettled Audrey, who had been trained by Billy Wilder and William Wyler and Fred Zinnemann in the disciplines of the old studio system. She spent, by the account of those who observed her on set, much of the first week, slightly off balance, still trying to locate her center, still trying to remember how to do this. The director, Richard Lester, shot fast, multiple cameras, minimal rehearsal, natural light whenever possible. He was not unkind, but he was not sentimental about the process, and he did not adjust his methods for a returning legend. After all, he said, with a bluntness that people noted, she had been away from the screen for 8 years. Filmmaking had changed a lot in that time. He was right. He was also not wrong to push her, because what emerged from that pressure, what came out of a nervous 45-year-old woman being asked to do the thing she had not done in 9 years with no safety net and no time to think, was something that film critics, in their various languages and registers, struggled to find adequate words for. Connery and Hepburn on screen together were, in Roger Ebert's phrase, marvelously complex, fond, tender people. Time Out called their playing unfashionably deep. The film's ending, in which Marian makes a decision about Robin's life that is simultaneously an act of love and an act of devastation, required Audrey to convey in a single extended performance something that most actors cannot access at any point in their careers. The specific quality of grief that has been held so long, it has become something else, something that looks from a certain angle like strength. She knew what that felt like. She had spent a decade learning exactly what that felt like. The film premiered in New York in March 1976 at Radio City Music Hall. Audrey was there. She wore a simple dress. She walked into a room full of industry people and journalists and critics who had been wondering for years where she had gone and what she had become, and when the lights came up after the screening, there was a moment of silence followed by a standing ovation, not polite applause, the kind of applause that sounds different, that carries something in it beyond appreciation, something that comes from recognition, from the audience understanding that they have been in the presence of something true. Several people in the room were crying, not from the film, or not only from the film, from the sight of her, from the understanding that the woman on screen had lived what she had performed, that the grief Marian carries in Robin and Marian was not a performance in the way that most performances are performances, but something drawn from a deeper well, something she had not had to invent. Audrey Hepburn stood in the lobby of Radio City Music Hall and received the applause with her characteristic stillness, the quality that had always made it difficult to tell what she was feeling, unless she decided to let you know. Those who were close enough to see her face said that she looked for a moment very young, not the way she had looked at 24 in Roman Holiday, but younger than she had looked in years, which is different. The way a person looks when something that has been compressed for a long time is allowed briefly to open. She had come back, not to what she had been. That was impossible, and she knew it, and she was too honest a person to pretend otherwise. She had come back to something harder and better than what she had been. She had come back to herself, the version of herself that had survived the years the world had not seen, the version forged in a kitchen in Tolokanas, and in the long silence of a Roman apartment, and in the small hours of a night when her son had sat beside her and waited for her to decide to get up. The reviews were generous, and sometimes more than generous. Critics noted that Hepburn had lost nothing essential and gained something indefinable. The Rotten Tomatoes consensus, assembled from the critical record, described it as ample success in the romantic chemistry between Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn. That was accurate as far as it went, and missed what mattered most, which was that the chemistry was not technique, It was two people who understood something about loss and time and the strange persistence of love, and who played that understanding without comment or decoration, simply and devastatingly, in every scene they shared. Audrey did not conquer Hollywood again after Robin and Marian. She never wanted to. She returned to Switzerland. She continued the slow, difficult work of understanding what remained of her marriage to Andrea, which was very little. She stayed as long as she could for Luca's sake, and left when she understood that staying had stopped protecting him and started hurting him instead. The divorce came in 1982. She had hung on for 13 years. She made a few more films. Bloodline in 1979. They All Laughed in 1981. They were not Robin and Marian. Nothing after Robin and Marian was Robin and Marian, and she knew it and was not distressed by it. Robin and Marian had not been about reclaiming a career. It had been about proving something to herself, about establishing that the person who had walked onto a set in Burbank in 1953 and onto a stage on Broadway in 1954 was still, under everything there, still equal to the task, still capable of the thing she had been made for. She spent the last years of her life doing something different. In 1988, she became a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador and traveled to Ethiopia and Sudan and Bangladesh and Somalia, places where children were dying, and sat with them in the way that she had always sat with people who needed someone to simply be present. The photographer John Isaac, who traveled with her on those missions, said that other people had hesitation about touching children who were sick or starving or covered in flies. Audrey had none. She picked them up, she held them. The children reached for her with the instinct that children have for people who understand, on a cellular level, what it is to be abandoned and to be afraid. She had understood that since she was 6 years old, standing in a garden in Brussels, watching her father walk down a path and not turn around. She died at her home in Tolokanas on January 20, 1993. She was 63 years old. Her sons were with her. Robert Walters, the man who had been her companion and her great late love, was with her. It was by all accounts peaceful. The kind of death that a person earns by deciding, at a certain point, to stop fighting everything and to allow the things that matter to simply matter. At the Hollywood premiere of Robin and Marian in 1976, in the lobby of Radio City Music Hall, a journalist had asked Audrey how it felt to be back. She had paused for a moment in the particular way that she paused when she was not going to give a performing answer, when she was going to try to say what was actually true. "It feels," she said, "like I've been away, and like coming home is harder than I expected. But it's still coming home." She meant the film. She probably also meant more than the film. She usually did. If you love these stories about the real lives behind the greatest stars in Hollywood history, like and subscribe. The stories that matter most are the ones they lived in the years nobody was watching. And this was one of them.